What is the trashiest thing you've ever witnessed? I calmly finished my prepackaged lunch and waited. Several minutes later, the young lady emerged wearing a triumphant expression, bid me farewell. Shortly thereafter, the manager appeared, inquired about my remaining hours, returned to his office, and re-emerged with a stack of documents certifying my community service as complete. I departed the establishment that day with no intention of returning, never having the opportunity to express my gratitude to that young lady for unknowingly liberating me from weeks of mundane labor. Story 23. One fateful evening, I found myself at what could generously be described as the most questionable establishment in town, accompanied by a group of friends. Among the regular patrons was a young woman in her 20s, executing an enthusiastic dance routine while sporting a comically inadequate bandage on her foot. The establishment's grimy floor only amplified the absurdity as her makeshift dressing became increasingly saturated with blood, leaving a macabre trail of crimson footprints in her wake. Despite her injury, she appeared to be having the time of her life. Eventually, she gravitated toward our group, focusing her attention on an acquaintance of my cousin, someone we'd just met that evening. As our conversation unfolded, we discovered she had achieved her injury by forcefully introducing her foot to a glass coffee table mere hours before arriving at the bar. Her justification? No big deal. Her foot was hemorrhaging profusely, creating miniature crimson pools beneath her. We implored her to seek medical attention or, at minimum, apply proper bandaging, but she dismissed our concerns with casual indifference. Eventually, my cousin's friend offered to transport her to the emergency room. She displayed surprising enthusiasm for this suggestion, and after some brief negotiation, they headed toward his vehicle. A few minutes later, we decided to conclude our evening and attempted to contact him regarding our next destination. As we approached the SUV we'd all arrived in, we were greeted by unmistakable sounds of passion. Upon opening the door, we discovered them engaged in intimate activities in the back seat. Her injured limb elevated over his shoulder, blood smeared across every surface, transforming the vehicle's interior into something resembling a crime scene, complete with pools, splatters, and streaks of crimson. The gentleman shouted, "Give us 5 minutes," while she contributed something about it not being a significant issue. Meanwhile, the SUV's rightful owner, our friend, was experiencing a complete meltdown, screaming about his vehicle being contaminated with potentially infectious bodily fluids. Before long, law enforcement arrived, likely summoned by the commotion. They approached with weapons drawn, believing the blood-soaked male might be perpetrating an assault. The woman, now mostly disrobed, began screaming at everyone about privacy violations. After several chaotic minutes, emergency medical services were summoned to treat her while the gentleman discreetly escaped in his own vehicle. He was later apprehended and charged with property damage. My friend had the vehicle professionally sanitized, but ultimately decided to sell it regardless. The star-crossed blood lovers maintained their relationship for several months, but by the time of the court hearing for damages, they had parted ways. She reportedly displayed zero remorse and maintained her indignation about the vehicle's owner objecting to bodily fluids decorating his car. Months later, I encountered her at a grocery store, enthusiastically kissing a new companion. I suppose that particular ship had indeed sailed. Story 24. I once maintained a romantic connection with a woman we'll call Mary, with whom I managed to preserve an amicable relationship over the years. We'd occasionally visit one another, maintain a platonic friendship, and sometimes I'd stay overnight. While I harbored lingering feelings for her, I was progressing with my life and exploring other romantic possibilities. Frequently during our conversations, she would abruptly interrupt me if I dared mention my current relationships, insisting I should show greater consideration for her feelings as my former partner than to discuss other romantic interests. I respected her wishes and avoided such topics. The final time we met, we ventured to a live music venue, consumed several drinks, and achieved a pleasant state of intoxication. That evening, she invited 2 local gentlemen back to her residence. Since I was staying with her, I naturally accompanied them. One of the men proved to be quite agreeable, and we engaged in pleasant conversation. The other, however, was the embodiment of social gracelessness, crude, unsociable, and even made a disturbing comment about appropriating a framed photograph of Mary for personal activities in the bathroom. Mary, however, seemed completely unfazed by his deplorable behavior. At one point, she reclined on the carpet in the center of the room, beckoned this questionable character over, and initiated a passionate exchange right there on the floor, barely a meter from where I sat. This was the same woman who had insisted I consider her feelings when discussing my relationships. That moment completely transformed my perception of her. Any residual romantic attachment evaporated, and following that night, we gradually ceased communication. I can pinpoint that precise moment as the termination of any effort I invested in maintaining our friendship. Story 1. Downtown Tempe on New Year's Eve, about 15 years ago, We were walking back to our cars after midnight when we spotted several police officers surrounding a large power box. Curiosity got the better of us, so we crept closer. What we saw made our jaws drop. Two completely naked homeless people, a man and a woman, were having passionate sex behind the box, seemingly unfazed by the growing police presence. When they realized the officers weren't going to stop them mid-act, they started waddling around and waving to the gathering crowd, like they were the stars of some bizarre parade. The man kept thrusting away with determined focus, while the woman blew kisses at the spectators. The crowd's reactions ranged from disgusted gasps to hysterical laughter. Things got wild when the police finally decided to intervene. They tried pepper spray first, then batons, but the man was on a mission to finish what he'd started. The grand finale came with a crackling taser shot. Both of them face-planted onto Mill Street like ragdolls. The woman apparently got tossed through their intimate connection. Talk about electricity in a relationship. The whole surreal show lasted about 15 minutes. Even now, years later, whenever I pass that power box, I can't help but crack a smile, though I'm still not sure whether to be amused or traumatized by what I witnessed that night. Story 2. As a paramedic, I once got called to what dispatch described as an active birth. When we arrived, we found 4 police officers outside doubled over with laughter. Never a good sign, since cops usually love birth calls. Inside, we found a 5th officer, a female, frozen in horror. The scene was shocking. A mother standing there with her newborn baby lying on the floor, not breathing, umbilical cord still attached. In her shaking hand was a lit crack pipe, still smoking. As we approached, out dropped the afterbirth. A clear sign this wasn't her first time giving birth. We later learned it was baby number 7 with father number 5. My team immediately split up, some of us working on the baby, while others tended to mom. We discovered she'd been smoking crack all night and hadn't noticed her baby turning blue. Then came this unbelievable exchange. Mom, isn't my baby beautiful? He's that color because his father is black. My partner, always ready with a quip. Honey, unless his father is a smurf, he's not supposed to be that shade. We managed to get the baby breathing and set up in 4. The little one's condition improved quickly. While I prepared for transport, my partner went back for the afterbirth, only to end up in a tug-of-war with the woman's huge pet rabbit. The baby made a full recovery and found a new home in foster care. Sometimes in our line of work, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. Story 3. When I was a preteen, I had the misfortune of consuming some questionable cuisine at a restaurant. We ventured to Target afterward, and the moment we crossed the threshold, my stomach unleashed an unholy rebellion. I bolted to the bathroom, and thus began a nightmarish cycle. Every 5 minutes, I was summoned back to the porcelain throne. Eventually, I resigned myself to my fate and told my parents to continue their shopping expedition and retrieve me later. About 10 minutes into this gastrointestinal apocalypse, I heard footsteps approaching the bathroom. My heart sank. Great, now they're going to experience the full sensory assault of this disaster. I silently prayed they'd turn back, but instead, I witnessed 3 pairs of feet shuffle into the stall next to me, 1 female, 2 male. To my absolute horror, these adventurous souls embarked on a full-blown threesome in the Target bathroom stall, mere inches from my own personal hell. While I was waging war with my intestines, the toxic fumes emanating from my side of the wall could have stripped paint, but it didn't deter their passionate encounter. I never glimpsed their faces, just their rhythmically moving feet, but it remains one of the most surreal experiences of my existence. Story 4. At a packed college party in a tiny apartment, all eyes turned when she walked in, a stunning girl, about 5 feet 7 inches, with the confidence of a runway model. She was wearing cut-off jean shorts that barely qualified as clothing and a paper-thin halter top that left little to imagination. The room practically crackled with electricity as she sashayed through the crowd, casually sipping her drink. The party had been your typical college gathering until she suddenly announced to the entire room, "Somebody ravish me." The music seemed to pause, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and every head turned. One brave soul, probably powered by liquid courage, managed to strike up a conversation. Within 2 minutes, yes, we were counting, she had him by the hand and was leading him to the bedroom, leaving behind a room full of dropped jaws and raised eyebrows. 20 minutes later, the lucky guy emerged looking like he'd just won the lottery, grinning from ear to ear. Before anyone could even ask what happened, her voice echoed from the bedroom. "Send in the next contestant." The room froze. You could hear a pin drop. We all looked at each other. There were about 15 guys and almost as many girls at the party, and nobody quite knew how to react to this unprecedented situation. Then she appeared in the doorway, completely naked, scanning the crowd like a lioness at a buffet. Her eyes locked onto a random guy, and with a seductive smile, she pointed and purred, "You're up, tiger." The chosen one looked like he'd just won a golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory as he followed her into what we'd now dubbed the Chamber of Secrets. The party had officially gone from typical college gathering to something that would become campus legend. The mix of shock, excitement, and disbelief on everyone's faces was priceless. Some guys were practically volunteering, while others were suddenly very interested in their phones or the contents of their cups, trying to avoid being next in line. Story 5. When I was 16, my mother joined an exclusive social circle for single professional moms. She received an intriguing invitation to an event the following evening, a screening of First Wives Club at a majestic historic theater. The organizers had orchestrated what seemed like a sophisticated affair, enlisting local firefighters to serve as gallant ushers, greeting each lady with a rose and champagne before escorting them to their seats. It promised to be an evening of elegance, but you asked for trashy, not classy, right? Patience, dear reader. Since my mother lacked transportation, I assumed the role of chauffeur, promising to retrieve her in 2 hours. Approximately 40 minutes later, I returned with my younger sibling only to discover a scene of utter chaos. Police vehicles and bewildered onlookers crowding the theater entrance. My mother had called earlier, cryptically mentioning an incident that required immediate extraction. This was in the dark ages before mobile phones, so we approached a stern-faced officer who escorted us inside. The spectacle that greeted us could have been lifted straight from a comedy sketch. A dozen or so formerly sophisticated, now thoroughly disheveled and visibly intoxicated middle-aged women in handcuffs, surrounded by a collection of traumatized and disheveled firefighters. Apparently, some of the more adventurous attendees had overindulged in the complimentary champagne and demanded the firefighters demonstrate their rapid undressing techniques. The men obliged with their uniforms, but that merely whetted the ladies' appetites. They insisted on a full strip show and became increasingly aggressive when the men declined. When law enforcement arrived, the lobby resembled a battlefield. Designer shoes scattered like fallen soldiers, hairstyles destroyed, clothing torn, and alarmed firefighters bearing the scratches and bruises of their encounter with suburban desire. These brave souls, trained to battle infernos, found themselves woefully unprepared for the onslaught of intoxicated women attempting to forcibly undress them. The officer guided us to a secluded office where my mother and a few other mortified women had taken refuge, thankfully uninvolved in the evening's more scandalous activities. We made our hasty retreat. For years afterward, whenever my mother attempted to lecture me about proper behavior, I'd gently remind her of the night I had to rescue her from what could only be described as an impromptu firefighter strip club riot. Story 6. Picture this. It's 2 a.m. at our local dive bar's infamous karaoke night. The regular crowd was starting to thin out when the star of our show made her entrance. The bar's owner, a force of nature in her mid-70s, decked out in a cotton candy pink cardigan that somehow made her look more intimidating, not less. She wasn't alone. Flanking her like a pair of wobbly bodyguards were her 2 granddaughters, both barely old enough to drink and dressed like they were auditioning for a reality TV show. The drama kicked off almost immediately. Grandma's eagle eyes locked onto a lone figure by the door, quietly enjoying his cigarette. After a whispered exchange that looked more like a drug deal than a conversation, they disappeared into the dark alley. Meanwhile, one granddaughter, apparently deciding the sidewalk was as good a place as any, hiked up her micro-mini skirt and created her own personal water feature right there on the concrete. The other granddaughter came stumbling around the corner, her voice cutting through the night like a foghorn. "Don't sell coke to my grandma, got it." From somewhere in the alley's shadows came Grandma's thunderous reply. "Shut the F asterisk 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 up, be asterisk 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 asterisk. It's my birthday, and I'll do whatever the hell I want." By the time I retreated inside for safety, I found the bartender 3 sheets to the wind, gleefully pouring double shots for anyone within arm's reach. It was like watching a ship sink while the captain handed out party favors. Just another night at our local establishment, where family values meant something entirely different. Story 7. I once attended what began as an elegant wedding in the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania. The ceremony itself was picture-perfect, set against the manicured backdrop of a prestigious golf course. But when the reception concluded at the stroke of 10, we decided to keep the party alive at a local establishment we'd discovered the previous evening. The venue was a dive bar that had seen better days, its walls adorned with decades of memorabilia and questionable stains. The bride, still resplendent in her designer gown, made quite an entrance. She'd traded her delicate tiara for a baseball cap worn backward and was clutching a bottle of Jack Daniels like it was her new bouquet. What followed was a spectacle that would have made reality TV producers weep with joy. The bride, fueled by an impressive mix of wedding champagne and whiskey, decided to demonstrate her pole dancing skills on a support beam. Her $5,000 dress ripped straight up the middle, but she was far too committed to her performance to notice or care. The groom, meanwhile, had stripped down to his boxers and dress socks, using his rented tuxedo as a makeshift cape while running around the bar screaming "Oh!" at random intervals. The mother of the bride was engaged in an intense game of quarters with a group of truckers, while the father of the groom had somehow managed to get himself stuck in the women's bathroom window during what he claimed was just a smoke break. The night reached its crescendo when the bride's grandmother, a seemingly proper lady in her late 70s, challenged the entire wedding party to a game of strip poker. She proceeded to clean everyone out, both financially and literally, proving herself to be a card shark of the highest order. The evening finally concluded when the bar owner, witnessing the grandmother beginning to unbutton her blouse after her latest victory, decided to call it a night. The next morning, the local newspaper ran a tasteful announcement about the beautiful ceremony, complete with a photo of the happy couple exchanging vows. Somewhere, there exists a very different set of photos from the after-party, which I'm told have been used as blackmail material at subsequent family gatherings. Story 8. About 3 years ago, I embarked on what would become an unforgettable Vegas adventure with friends. One of my companions extended invitations to his university crowd, transforming our intimate group into a sprawling entourage of 15 to 20 souls. They assured me accommodation arrangements were handled, so I naively dismissed any concerns, rookie mistake. Upon arrival at our hotel, a mid-tier establishment on the Strip, we discovered our suite was actually a standard room with 2 queen beds. The organizers' brilliant solution? Everyone would take shifts sleeping. This sparked a heated debate in the lobby, which security swiftly shut down. Eventually, we crammed 8 people into our room, while the others dispersed to find alternative arrangements. The real entertainment began around 3 a.m. when one of our roommates, a statuesque blonde who'd been drinking since touchdown, decided she absolutely had to get some. She proceeded to bring back a succession of men throughout the night. Her selection process was remarkably democratic. She'd stand in the doorway, point at random men passing by, and beckon them inside. This pattern continued. She ultimately selected 8 different champions over the course of this epic night. By the time she reached the final few, she had abandoned all pretense of privacy. The concluding rounds were particularly spectacular as she stood framed in the doorway, proudly displaying the evening's activities. Undaunted, I managed to avoid being chosen by lurking in the kitchen, observing cautiously from my culinary fortress. After concluding her final conquest, she casually sauntered out, donned her minimal attire again, secured a cup of party punch, and vanished into the night as if she'd just finished a routine social call. Later we discovered she was merely 16, a local resident, and apparently this wasn't her first performance of this nature. Story 9. Last night, while mindlessly scrolling through the digital abyss of Facebook, I stumbled upon a relationship status update that would unfold into an epic saga of modern romance. My 27-year-old brother and his 18-year-old girlfriend had apparently decided to take their whirlwind 6-month romance to the next level, engagement. The comments section quickly transformed into a digital battleground. His ex-wife, yes, there's history, launched the first salvo, unleashing a barrage of revelations about his alleged shortcomings as a partner and parent. Not to be outdone, his new fiancé's mother joined the fray, defending her daughter's honor while simultaneously questioning my brother's intentions, character, and employment status. The situation escalated when my brother's best friend, in an ill-advised attempt at humor, shared a particularly compromising photo from their recent escapades at a local gentleman's club. This prompted the fiancé to launch into a caps-lock tirade about trust and betrayal, punctuated by an impressive array of emojis. Meanwhile, my mother, still mastering the art of social media, accidentally loved every single comment, including those questioning her parenting skills. The grand finale came when the fiancé's father, a man who had apparently been unaware of the engagement, or indeed, his daughter's relationship, joined the discussion. His contribution consisted of a single comment, "I'm coming over." This sparked a mass deletion of previous comments and a hasty status change back to, in a relationship. The entire spectacle lasted less than 2 hours, but the screenshots will live forever in our family's group chat. My brother has since implemented strict privacy settings on his Facebook account, though I notice he still hasn't figured out how to unlike the local singles groups he joined in panic mode immediately after. Story 10. Picture this. I'm at a Britney Spears concert, and nature calls with an urgency that can't be ignored. I make my way to the men's room, only to find it transformed into a surreal scene of gender role reversal. The women's line had grown so impossibly long that the ladies had staged a hostile takeover of our facilities. Inside, it was pure chaos. Women were occupying every available stall, while others formed an impromptu queue that snaked around the urinals. The air was thick with perfume and the excited chatter of concertgoers discussing Britney's performance. A particularly resourceful group had commandeered the sink counter as a makeshift vanity station, touching up their makeup and taking selfies. The most surreal moment came when I witnessed 2 women attempting to use a urinal in tandem, one holding the other up in an impressive display of teamwork and balance. Their giggles echoed off the tile walls as they celebrated their successful navigation of unfamiliar plumbing. Meanwhile, a line of bewildered men stood awkwardly by the door, unsure whether to assert their territorial rights or simply accept this temporary revolution. The situation reached peak absurdity when a security guard finally arrived to restore order. He took one look at the scene, shook his head, and declared, "I don't get paid enough for this." He then proceeded to stand outside, directing traffic and attempting to establish some semblance of bathroom equity. By the time I finally got to use the facilities, Brittany was halfway through Toxic, an ironically fitting soundtrack to the evening's bathroom adventures. To this day, whenever I hear that song, I can't help but think of the great bathroom coup of 2009. Story 11. During my youthful days as a fresh-faced Marine, a few battle buddies and I decided to rent a hotel room in San Diego for a weekend of civilian revelry. Two of us ventured out into the night while the other two remained behind, promising to join us later. They never materialized, but we had an epic evening regardless. Upon returning to our room around 3 a.m., we discovered why our friends had gone AWOL. Opening the door, we were greeted by a scene straight out of a low-budget adult film. One of our missing comrades was engaged in passionate activities with an enthusiastic lady friend, while our other buddy sat in the corner, contentedly munching on a burrito and providing color commentary. The woman, displaying remarkable composure, paused mid-activity to wave hello and introduce herself as Candy. She then proceeded to explain, in impressive detail, her rates and services while maintaining her current position. Our burrito-eating friend chimed in with his own review, complete with a detailed cost-benefit analysis of the evening's entertainment. The real kicker came when we learned that Candy was actually the wife of a fellow Marine, one who was currently deployed overseas. This revelation sparked a hasty retreat by all parties involved. Our room's previous occupants quickly gathered their belongings, with Candy pausing only briefly to leave her business card for future reference. The next morning, we all silently agreed to never speak of the incident again. However, for months afterward, mysterious business cards would occasionally appear in our friend's wallet, desk, or locker, a running joke that eventually led to him requesting a transfer to a different unit. Story 12. This sordid tale unfolded in my beloved city Manchester, specifically in the bustling precinct, an entertainment district teeming with bars, pubs, restaurants, and a cinema, the Print Works, for those familiar with the locale. It was approximately 8 p.m. on a weekend evening, so the area was alive with a diverse crowd. Families with children and casual evening revelers, not necessarily the typical party crowd. As I strolled past one of the more upscale establishments, my attention was drawn to a commotion near the entrance. A couple, clearly several drinks deep into their evening, had decided that the front steps of this fine dining establishment would be the perfect venue for an impromptu display of affection. And by affection, I mean they were engaged in activities typically reserved for private quarters. The woman, dressed in what had probably started the evening as elegant attire, was now sprawled across the steps in a rather compromising position. Her companion, his suit pants around his ankles, seemed utterly oblivious to the growing crowd of shocked onlookers. The maitre d' stood frozen in horror, his reservation book clutched to his chest like a shield. The situation reached its climax, quite literally, just as a family of tourists rounded the corner. The mother quickly covered her children's eyes, while the father fumbled with his camera phone. Though whether to document the incident or simply out of shock-induced autopilot, I couldn't tell. The couple, having concluded their performance, casually adjusted their clothing and sauntered into the restaurant, as if they'd merely been checking the evening's specials. The most surreal part? They were actually seated and served dinner, though I noticed they were given a table well away from the windows. The incident has since become something of a local legend, and I've heard the restaurant now employs a security guard specifically to monitor those steps. Story 13. When I was 13, I resided just down the street from a questionable establishment, a dive bar that would eventually meet its demise for reasons that will become painfully clear. One crisp winter afternoon, as I made my way to the local store, I passed by this notorious watering hole. Parked outside was a weathered pickup truck with a small child, perhaps 6 years old, perched in the passenger seat innocently waving at passersby. On my return journey, I noticed the truck was still there, but now a commotion was brewing inside the bar. Through the grimy windows, I could see a woman, presumably the child's mother, engaged in what appeared to be an intense disagreement with several other patrons. The situation quickly escalated when she grabbed a pool cue and began wielding it like a medieval warrior's staff. What followed was a scene straight out of a low-budget action movie. The woman, fueled by what I can only assume was a potent combination of maternal instinct and bottom-shelf liquor, proceeded to clear the bar using a combination of pool cue strikes and impressively creative profanity, all while shouting, "Nobody tells me how to raise my kid." The grand finale came when she attempted to demonstrate her gymnastic prowess by swinging from the ceiling fan. This proved to be a miscalculation, as both she and the fan came crashing down onto the bar in a shower of dust, debris, and decades-old cigarette tar. The child, still sitting patiently in the truck, simply continued waving at shocked onlookers. The establishment was shut down shortly after this incident, though I'm not sure if it was due to the structural damage to the ceiling or the general realization that perhaps serving alcohol to parents who use the parking lot as a daycare facility wasn't the best business model. Story 14. During my high school years, I found myself at a gathering hosted by individuals whose grip on sanity was questionably loose. I arrived fashionably late, about an hour into the festivities, and the scene was already descending into magnificent chaos. One particularly intoxicated gentleman was executing what can only be described as a drunken mating ritual, stumbling from female to female, practically collapsing onto them in his attempts at romantic connection. He performed this graceless dance with 4 or 5 unsuspecting targets within a mere 30 minutes. Surprisingly, most of the ladies seemed receptive to his charms, only halting their encounters when their more clear-headed friends intervened. The evening's entertainment reached its peak when our Romeo discovered the host's mother's bedroom. In a display of remarkable agility for someone in his condition, he managed to scale her dresser and proceeded to urinate into her jewelry box. The discovery of this creative contribution led to his swift ejection from the premises, but not before he had thoroughly marked his territory. The aftermath was equally memorable. The host spent the next day meticulously cleaning and sanitizing every piece of jewelry, while simultaneously trying to fabricate a plausible explanation for why her mother's accessories now smelled like a poorly maintained public restroom. It was a valuable lesson in party planning and the importance of locking bedroom doors. Story 15. My wife was employed at an establishment that straddled the line between bar and restaurant, and their annual Christmas celebration had achieved legendary status. The libations flowed with unprecedented generosity. The door prizes were nothing short of extraordinary, and the evening inevitably descended into beautifully orchestrated chaos. During one particularly memorable celebration, a colleague of my wife's, let's call her Sarah, had indulged perhaps a bit too enthusiastically in the holiday spirits. As the night progressed, she became increasingly amorous toward another co-worker's husband. The situation reached its climax when Sarah, in a moment of liquid courage, decided to demonstrate her pole dancing abilities using a support beam in the middle of the restaurant. Her impromptu performance came to an abrupt end when she lost her grip and tumbled directly onto the table, holding the remaining door prizes. The crash was spectacular, the prizes scattered like festive shrapnel, and Sarah emerged from the wreckage with a Santa hat perched askew on her head, declaring, "I meant to do that," before promptly passing out. The following day, she tendered her resignation via email, sparing herself the awkwardness of facing her colleagues, and more importantly, her co-worker's husband in person. Story 16. My vehicle suffered an unfortunate collision when a distracted driver rear-ended me while I was properly stopped at a traffic signal. The impact propelled my car forward into the vehicle ahead. The rear section of my automobile was completely decimated, and the front sustained significant damage from the secondary impact. The at-fault driver, accompanied by 3 passengers, immediately launched into a theatrical performance worthy of an Oscar. All 4 occupants began writhing in apparent agony, clutching various body parts and wailing about their injuries. Their dramatic display caught the attention of several witnesses, who promptly called emergency services. When the police and paramedics arrived, these aspiring actors suddenly transformed into seasoned insurance fraud artists. They began crafting elaborate tales of my reckless driving, complete with wild gesticulations and synchronized groaning. However, their performance fell flat when the responding officer pointed out the obvious physics of a rear-end collision and the presence of multiple witnesses who confirmed my complete stop at the red light. Their insurance company later revealed this wasn't their first attempt at such a performance. Apparently, they were serial crash artists with a history of suspicious claims. Story 17. During my 2nd or 3rd week of employment at a pawn shop, we encountered a regular visitor, a desperate soul who appeared daily attempting to exchange various dubious tools for his chemical dependencies. Each day we politely declined his offerings, and each day he would return undeterred. On this particular afternoon, he shuffled in with a suspiciously new-looking chainsaw, complete with price tags still attached. When questioned about its origin, he launched into an elaborate tale about inheriting it from his recently deceased grandmother, a story that might have been more convincing had the receipt dated that morning not fallen from his pocket. His response to being caught, a shrug and a candid admission. Well, can't blame a guy for trying. See you tomorrow with something better. The most remarkable aspect wasn't his failed attempt at pawning stolen merchandise, but rather his complete lack of shame or concern about being caught. He treated our daily rejections as mere temporary setbacks in his ongoing entrepreneurial venture. True to his word, he returned the next day with a different item, equally suspicious in origin, but with a fresh story to match. Story 18. I'm uncertain whether this tale qualifies as trashy or merely profoundly heartbreaking. I was enjoying a peaceful evening at a Kagwe campground, nestled in a one-room cabin, relaxing on the porch with my companions when a woman and her young son, approximately 7 to 10 years old, arrived at the neighboring cabin. The child was bubbling with enthusiasm, chattering away about the joys of camping and eagerly anticipating their planned movie night. However, the mother had different plans. Within an hour of their arrival, she had connected with some fellow campers and proceeded to get thoroughly intoxicated. As the night wore on, she stumbled back to their cabin with a male companion, leaving her son to fend for himself. The poor kid spent hours sitting alone on their porch, occasionally calling out "Mom" into the darkness, while the sounds of his mother's romantic encounter echoed through the thin cabin walls. My heart ached for this child, whose camping adventure had devolved into a night of abandonment and confusion. We considered intervening, but weren't sure how to handle such a delicate situation. The following morning, the mother emerged as if nothing had happened, while her son sat quietly at the picnic table, his excitement from the previous evening completely extinguished. Sometimes the trashiest behavior isn't just offensive, it's tragic. Story 19. My first and only experience attending a NASCAR event unfolded at a newly inaugurated track in our vicinity. My boyfriend had secured complimentary tickets, and the day progressed smoothly until the moment of departure. The track, being in its infancy stages, had yet to perfect its parking and exit infrastructure. Picture, if you will, 180,000 souls simultaneously attempting to evacuate the premises. Absolute pandemonium ensued, rapidly devolving into an epic traffic quagmire. After 3 hours of glacial progress, my boyfriend's patience evaporated. In a moment of questionable judgment, he decided to create his own exit route by driving across a grassy embankment. This improvised shortcut caught the attention of law enforcement, who promptly intercepted our vehicle. When the officer approached, my boyfriend, fueled by frustration and perhaps a few too many race day beverages, launched into a passionate tirade about his perceived rights as an American citizen to drive wherever he pleased. The situation escalated when he decided to exit the vehicle, adamantly insisting on demonstrating to the officer exactly why his chosen path was perfectly logical. His impromptu presentation, complete with wild gesticulations and increasingly colorful language, earned him a set of handcuffs and a night in the county jail. I spent the next several hours navigating the labyrinthine process of posting bail, all while contemplating the life choices that had led to this particular moment. Story 20. Fashionably late to this gathering of tales, but here's a particularly wild narrative. A friend informed us that an acquaintance from our school days had returned to town after a 6-month stint in the Navy and suggested we organize a celebratory outing. We were all approximately 19 at the time, residing in Newcastle, a city renowned for its legendary nightlife. The evening began in relatively unremarkable fashion until around 2 a.m. when events took a dramatic turn. We found ourselves in a decidedly questionable establishment when my companion tapped my shoulder, wearing an expression of absolute horror, and gestured behind me. Upon turning, I beheld our naval friend engaging in some rather explicit manual exploration with a young lady right in the middle of the dance floor, making no attempt at discretion. They were attempting to engage in passionate kissing, or at least their interpretation of it, their heads colliding with such force that one or both of them sustained split lips. Blood now decorated their faces as they continued their amorous exchange with the enthusiasm of children attacking melting ice cream cones. To compound the spectacle, the young lady was, shall we say, not particularly subtle in expressing her appreciation, and our friend, while not exactly the pinnacle of sophistication himself, seemed perfectly content with the arrangement. A crowd of onlookers gathered, some wearing expressions of disgusted horror, others displaying morbid fascination. At this juncture, we decided it might be prudent to intervene and extract our naval friend from the situation before matters escalated further. Unfortunately, the evening's entertainment was far from concluded. The young lady, having apparently misplaced her companions, decided to follow us into the street. One of my associates, so thoroughly intoxicated he barely maintained a tenuous grip on reality, found himself the recipient of her affections when she, blood-stained and disheveled, with her clothing in considerable disarray, attempted to forcibly introduce her tongue to his mouth. He offered minimal resistance. This display, of course, enraged our naval friend, who began berating my companion for engaging with his lady. Meanwhile, my friend maintained a vacant expression that perfectly captured the sentiment, "What in the name of all that's holy is transpiring?" The young lady burst into tears, and we all stood around, partially inebriated and partially amused, observing this magnificent train wreck. Eventually, we managed to restore some semblance of calm and attempted to reunite the young lady with her companions. When this proved futile due to her extreme state of intoxication, rendering her incapable of providing useful information, we deposited her at one of the drunk rescue points cities in England occasionally establish for precisely such situations and called it a night. I've deliberately avoided subsequent social engagements with our naval friend, a decision that has likely served me well. Story 21. This narrative lacks the humor of its predecessors, but undeniably fits our criteria. I had a cherished friend during my elementary and middle school years who possessed one of the most genuinely beautiful souls I've ever encountered. Unfortunately, her domestic situation was nothing short of nightmarish, a fact that manifested itself in every aspect of her existence. Her residence existed in such a state of squalor that everything in her possession, her clothing, her backpack, every item, carried the unmistakable aroma of neglect. I maintained a diplomatic silence regarding this, but plenty of our peers, lacking such restraint, voiced their observations with cruel precision. Fortunately for her, my own boisterous and occasionally obnoxious personality drew more negative attention, effectively providing her some relief. I suspect this shared experience of social ostracism contributed to her comfort in my presence. Even from an outsider's perspective, her family situation screamed dysfunction. My mother steadfastly refused to allow me to spend nights at her house, insisting instead that she visit our home. Years later, my mother confessed this arrangement was deliberately designed to provide my friend at least occasional respites of peace and cleanliness. However, on one occasion, my mother relented and permitted me to stay at her residence, a decision I now wish she hadn't made. The house existed in a state that defied description. Animal waste carpeted the floors, garbage formed archaeological layers, rotting food decorated every surface, and her father's adult entertainment materials were brazenly displayed on the computer screen. Though I failed to fully comprehend it at the time, years later the house's condition proved so severe it required demolition rather than renovation, earning it an infamous reputation within our community. But the true depths of depravity weren't found in the physical conditions, but rather in their treatment of her. During dinner, her parents casually discussed their impending divorce, specifically debating which sibling they'd be burdened with. It wasn't presented as humor. They were genuinely divorcing and arguing over who would be stuck with her. Both adamantly insisted the other parent should assume responsibility. It resembled a twisted game of hot potato. On another occasion, during her birthday celebration at an amusement park, while she visited the restroom, her mother launched into a venomous tirade to a group of 11-year-olds about her daughter's supposed awfulness, spewing the most vile, hateful sentiments imaginable about her own child. The other girls nodded along, likely motivated by fear. I know with certainty my friend overheard everything. She stood mere feet away. To this day, I struggle to comprehend how individuals could treat their own offspring with such calculated cruelty. That family embodied trashiness in every conceivable dimension. The only miracle emerging from this cesspool of dysfunction was how my friend maintained her sweet and compassionate nature despite the toxic environment that surrounded her. Story 22. During my adolescent years, I found myself serving 160 hours of community service, a consequence of youthful indiscretion. I opted to fulfill my sentence at a donation center, organizing merchandise and counting down the endless hours until my release. Most shifts passed without incident, save for the occasional shoplifting attempt or public meltdown. Once I even intercepted a gentleman engaged in some rather inappropriate olfactory exploration of the women's intimate apparel section. A few shifts into my sentence, I encountered a fellow delinquent also serving community service. She possessed a certain allure, though her demeanor hinted at questionable life choices. We engaged in mild flirtation, reasoning it might make the hours pass more swiftly. One day during our break, as we occupied a table in the back, she casually mentioned her desire to abbreviate her remaining service hours. She rose from her seat, approached the store manager's office, and requested a private consultation. Moments later, the unmistakable sounds of amorous activity began emanating from within, accompanied by rhythmic furniture movement. I turned to witness her straddling the manager, completely unfazed by my presence as an inadvertent spectator. For a brief moment, I sat frozen, uncertain whether to make my exit or feign obliviousness. The manager eventually maneuvered his chair to secure the office door.